There's a strange kind of power in silence, not the kind where we're cold, punishing, or manipulative, but the kind where we remove the noise of chasing, over-explaining, and over-giving. That silence has the ability to rattle someone who's used to distance being their shield. You see, an avoidant person thrives on space. They're used to you filling the gaps, doing the reaching out, the apologizing, the constant reassurance. But when you step back, when you stop running after them and instead hold your ground, your silence becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, they don't see your absence, they see their own. What shakes them is not that you've gone quiet, it's that they realize the balance has shifted. Suddenly, the safety net of you always being there is no longer guaranteed. Your silence is not emptiness, it's presence contained and dignified. It tells them, I'm here, but I don't need to prove it to you every second. This silence has the power to create tension, and tension is where attraction and clarity are born. Not in the endless giving, but in the pauses that make someone wonder what they stand to lose. So the silence that shakes an avoidant isn't cruel, it's clarity. It's the boundary that says, I value connection, but I value myself too. And in that stillness, the avoidant has to decide. Do they step forward into intimacy, or do they fade back into the shadows? Either way, you win. Because your silence taught them something their comfort zones never did, that real connection requires movement, not avoidance. Silence is often misunderstood. Many people assume that when someone goes quiet, it's an act of rejection, punishment, or even a lack of care. But in reality, silence can hold an extraordinary kind of power when it comes from a place of strength and dignity. It's not about shutting down emotionally or disappearing without explanation, but about choosing not to fill every space with words or actions that don't serve you. Silence, when rooted in self-respect, becomes a declaration of presence. It says, I am here, I am whole, and I don't need to constantly prove my value through noise. When you think about how relationships often play out, there's usually one person who gives more, explains more, or chases more, especially when tension arises. They rush to send the first message, to clarify their intentions, to soothe discomfort, or to fix the dynamic before it falls apart. And while that energy may come from a place of care, it can easily slide into self-abandonment. It sends the message that the other person's comfort matters more than their own peace. But silence breaks that cycle. It interrupts the pattern of over-delivering and creates space for balance to return. Silence also redefines the meaning of presence. In our culture, we often equate presence with action, talking, texting, explaining, or doing something to demonstrate that we care. Yet presence doesn't always require movement. Sometimes it's about stillness, about being comfortable enough with yourself that you don't need to constantly fill the gaps. When you stay grounded in silence, you show that you are emotionally secure and that your worth isn't tied to someone else's response or lack of response. This kind of presence is magnetic because it communicates confidence without words. It's important to note that dignified silence is very different from passive-aggressiveness. The intention behind it matters. Passive-aggressive silence comes from wanting to punish or manipulate, but dignified silence is rooted in self-respect. It's not about controlling the other person. It's about showing that you won't abandon yourself for the sake of chasing validation. In that sense, silence becomes a boundary. It's not shutting someone out. It's choosing not to overextend yourself to be let in. Another reason silence holds such power is that it changes the energy of the interaction. If someone is used to you filling every gap, they never feel the weight of the space between you. But when you step back, they are forced to feel it. That doesn't mean you're being cruel. It means you're letting reality breathe. Instead of rescuing the moment with constant words or gestures, you allow the other person to notice what it feels like when you stop overcompensating. That awareness can only come through silence. Ultimately, silence teaches both you and the other person something vital. For you, it's the reminder that you don't need to earn your place through noise. For them, it's the realization that your presence is not a given, but a gift. And in that stillness, both people are invited to step into greater clarity about themselves, about the connection, and about what truly matters. Avoidants often operate within the comfort of space. It's the environment where they feel safe, where intimacy doesn't feel overwhelming, and where they can control how much of themselves they reveal. When you are the one constantly closing the gap, sending the first message, arranging the plans, smoothing over conflicts, you unknowingly reinforce this pattern. You teach them that they don't need to step forward because you will always be the one bridging the distance. They become accustomed to your pursuit, and as a result, they never truly feel the tension of what it means to risk losing you. But when you step back, when you decide not to fill the silence with chasing, the dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the space they rely on is no longer a safe haven. It becomes a reminder of the effort they are not making. Silence interrupts the avoidance comfort zone by removing the chase. It strips away the reassurance they have grown used to and forces them to confront the reality that connection cannot thrive on one-sided effort. Without your constant pursuit, the dynamic becomes balanced, and they are left with the realization that maintaining the relationship is not just your responsibility. This silence isn't about playing games or manipulating their behavior. It's about resetting the balance of energy between two people. For too long, the avoidant has been in a position of comfort, knowing that you will always take on the emotional labor of reaching out and keeping things alive. When you choose silence, you are not withholding love. You are creating space for accountability. You are allowing the avoidant to feel the natural consequence of their distance, rather than rescuing them from it. It's also important to understand the psychology of why silence has such an impact. An avoidant relies on control to feel safe. They control how close they get, how much they reveal, and how much effort they invest. But when you stop chasing, you shift that control. The avoidant can no longer predict the dynamic because you are no longer supplying the constant flow of reassurance. This unpredictability unsettles them, not because you're punishing them, but because the relationship no longer fits the script they are comfortable with. The beauty of silence is that it puts the ball in their court. It asks without words, will you step forward or will you let the connection fade? For the first time, they must decide whether closeness matters enough to them to take action. And while you may not always get the outcome you desire, what you do gain is clarity. Their response, or lack of it, shows you what they are truly capable of giving. In the process, you reclaim your own power. Instead of exhausting yourself by overgiving, you invest in your own calm and presence. You teach yourself that you do not need to earn love by chasing it, and if the avoidant cares enough to rise to the occasion, they will. If they don't, then your silence has protected you from investing further in a connection that only survived because of your relentless effort. In either case, you win because you chose dignity over desperation and self-respect over pursuit. A mirror is one of the most confronting things we can ever face because it reflects back not what we want to see, but what is actually there. Silence works in exactly that way with an avoidant. When you step back and stop filling every gap with words, reassurance, or effort, your silence becomes the mirror they cannot escape. It reflects their own behavior, their patterns, and the emptiness created by their distance. For perhaps the first time, they are left alone with themselves, and that can be deeply unsettling. An avoidant often moves through relationships with the unspoken assumption that the other person will always compensate for their withdrawal. They rely on your eagerness to keep things going, to keep reaching out, and to keep smoothing over any disconnect. But the moment you decide to stop chasing and instead allow the silence to stand, you force them to see what they contribute, or fail to contribute, to the relationship. Your silence doesn't just show absence, it highlights the imbalance. It shines a light on the fact that without your consistent effort, there isn't much left holding things together. This reflection is not always easy for them to face. Avoidants build their defenses around the idea that intimacy is risky and that pulling away keeps them safe. But when the silence stretches, they begin to realize that safety comes at a cost, the loss of true connection. The mirror you hold up with your silence shows them that their avoidance doesn't just protect them from vulnerability, it isolates them from closeness. They cannot hide from that truth when you stop providing the comfort of pursuit. The power of silence as a mirror is also that it removes distraction. When you keep talking, explaining, or reaching out, it's easy for an avoidant to deflect or rationalize their behavior. They can minimize, dismiss, or overlook their own lack of effort because the noise of your pursuit covers it up. But silence leaves no room for distraction. In that stillness, the avoidant is left with the undeniable awareness that you are no longer filling the void. That void is theirs to feel and theirs to address. For you, this silence is not about manipulation, but about truth. You are simply holding up a mirror to the reality of the dynamic. If they want to see love, care, and closeness reflected back, they must begin to bring those qualities into the relationship themselves. If all they see is distance, avoidance, and disconnection, then that reflection is not coming from you, it is coming from them. The beauty of letting silence act as a mirror is that it shifts responsibility back to where it belongs. You no longer carry the burden of proving, convincing, or holding the relationship together on your own. Instead, the avoidant is invited to see the consequences of their behavior and to make a choice about whether they will step up or continue to step back. The mirror doesn't lie, and through silence, you allow them to see themselves more clearly than any words ever could. Silence has an interesting way of creating tension. When everything has always been explained, justified, and pursued by one person, there's little room for the other to feel uncertainty or curiosity. But when silence enters the space, it changes the energy. Suddenly, the avoidant no longer knows where they stand, and that tension begins to build. Tension is not always comfortable, but it is necessary. Without it, relationships lose their spark, their clarity, and their drive forward. It's within tension that people start asking themselves the important questions. Where do I stand with this person? What do I actually want? What am I willing to risk to keep this connection alive? An avoidant often relies on the absence of tension. They find security in predictability, in knowing that you will always be the one to reach out, apologize, or bridge the gap. That certainty allows them to stay comfortable in their pattern of distance without fear of losing you. But when you embrace silence instead of rushing in to close the gap, you disrupt that predictability. The avoidant is left to sit in the unfamiliar territory of not knowing whether you will move first. That's where the tension arises, not from you doing something, but from you doing nothing. This kind of tension is powerful because it creates clarity. Without it, the avoidant never has to confront their feelings or decide what they truly value. They can stay in the gray area, safe behind their walls, but with silence holding the space, they are forced to reckon with what they stand to lose. Tension makes them evaluate whether the connection is worth the discomfort of stepping forward. It highlights that intimacy is not built on avoidance, but on effort and reciprocity. For you, silence becomes a way of reclaiming your own balance. Instead of anxiously trying to resolve the unease, you allow the natural discomfort of tension to play its role. You give the other person the opportunity to step into that space and show you what they are capable of when you stop doing all the work. And if they don't rise to the occasion, that in itself is a form of clarity. Their inaction speaks volumes about their readiness or willingness to meet you halfway. The truth is that tension is not the enemy of relationships. It is the birthplace of honesty. Without it, connections remain shallow, one-sided, or stagnant. By staying silent, you introduce a healthy kind of pressure that reveals truths words could never touch. The avoidant either leans into the discomfort and grows, or they retreat further into distance. Either way, the tension delivers you an answer. It tells you whether this is a connection that can evolve or one that is destined to remain unbalanced. In this way, silence is not passive, it is active. It creates a dynamic shift that forces both people to confront reality. The avoidant feels the weight of the gap they've created, and you free yourself from the cycle of endlessly trying to close it. Through tension, clarity emerges, and clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is always a gift. The silence that you choose in a moment of self-respect is not empty, it is an invitation. It quietly asks the other person whether they are willing to step forward or whether they prefer to remain where they are. This is why silence forces a decision. For someone who tends to avoid closeness, the absence of your constant pursuit leaves them with a choice they cannot ignore. They can either move toward intimacy, risking vulnerability, or they can retreat further into the safety of distance. The decision is theirs, but the silence ensures that a decision must finally be made. Avoidants often thrive in the middle ground, in the gray area where things are neither fully connected nor completely broken. They keep enough distance to feel safe, yet they rely on your efforts to ensure that the connection never fully fades. It's a space where they have the illusion of control, and as long as you keep reaching out, they never have to confront what they are really willing to give. But when you step into silence, that middle ground collapses. The comfort of indecision disappears. They no longer have the luxury of lingering in ambiguity because the balance has shifted. Your silence asks them to reveal where they truly stand. This doesn't mean they will always choose to come closer. Some avoidants, when faced with the discomfort of having to act, may decide that distance is easier. And while that may feel painful in the short term, it is also liberating. It provides you with clarity. Instead of staying trapped in a cycle of uncertainty, you now know what they are capable of offering. Their decision, or indecision, becomes the answer you've been waiting for, even if it isn't the one you hoped for. For others, however, the silence may be a wake-up call. It disrupts the pattern they've relied on and makes them realize that the connection they've taken for granted is not indestructible. The awareness that they could actually lose you can stir something within them that words and reassurances never could. It pushes them to ask themselves if they're willing to risk the absence of something valuable just to maintain their comfort zone. In many cases, this nudge is enough to encourage growth. It shows them that intimacy requires movement, not stagnation. For you, silence serves a double purpose. On one hand, it is a tool that naturally brings hidden truths to the surface. On the other, it is a shield that protects your dignity. You are no longer begging for clarity or chasing someone who isn't ready to step up. Instead, you stand in your own power, knowing that whatever decision they make, you have already chosen yourself. The silence ensures that the relationship either evolves into something healthier or it fades away, sparing you the exhaustion of carrying it on your own. In the end, silence doesn't just force their decision, it affirms yours. You decide that your value will not be diminished by someone else's avoidance. You decide that connection must be mutual, not one-sided. And in doing so, you create the space for either genuine intimacy to emerge or for freedom to step in where avoidance once lived. In the end, the silence that shakes an avoidant is not about control, punishment, or distance. It's about self-respect, clarity, and reclaiming balance in a connection. It's a reminder that love cannot be sustained by one person's constant effort, and that sometimes the most powerful statement we can make is found not in words, but in stillness. By holding our ground, we give others the chance to step forward or step away, and either outcome leads us closer to truth. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for valuing these moments of insight. Your presence here means more than words could ever capture.